Chapter 2, Part 1 of Principia Ethica. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Fredrik Karlsson. Principia Ethica by G.E. Moore. Chapter 2, Naturalistic Ethics. 24. It results from the conclusions of Chapter 1 that all ethical questions fall under one or other of three classes. The first class contains but one question. The question, what is the nature of that particular predicate, the relation of which to other things constitutes the object of all other ethical investigations? Or, in other words, what is meant by good? This first question I have already attempted to answer. The peculiar predicate, by reference to which the sphere of ethics must be defined, is simple, unanalyzable, indefinable. There remain two questions with regard to the relation of this predicate to other things. We may ask either 1. To what things and in what degree does this predicate directly attach? What things are good in themselves? Or 2. By what means shall we be able to make what exists in the world as good as possible? What causal relations hold between what is best in itself, and other causal relations hold between what is best in itself and other things? In this and the two following chapters I propose to discuss certain theories which offer us an answer to the question, what is good in itself? I say advisedly an answer, for these theories are all characterized by the fact that, if true, they would simplify the study of ethics very much. They all hold that there is only one kind of fact of which the existence has any value at all. But they all possess another characteristic which is my reason for grouping them together and treating them first, namely that the main reason why the single kind of fact they name has been held to define the sole good is that it has been held to define what is meant by good itself. In other words, they are all theories of the end or ideal, the adoption of which has been chiefly caused by the commission of what I have called the naturalistic fallacy. They all confuse the first and second of the three possible questions which ethics can ask. It is, indeed, this fact which explains their contention that only a single kind of thing is good. That a thing should be good, it has been thought, means that it possesses this single property, and hence, it is thought, only what possesses this property is good. The inference seems very natural, and yet what is meant by it is self-contradictory. For those who make it fail to perceive that their conclusion, what possesses this property is good, is a significant proposition. That it does not mean either what possesses this property possesses this property, or the word good denotes that a thing possesses this property. And yet, if it does not mean one or other of these two things, the inference contradicts its own premise. I propose, therefore, to discuss certain theories of what is good in itself, which are based on the naturalistic fallacy, in the sense that the commission of this fallacy has been the main cause of their wide acceptance. The discussion will be designed both 1. Further to illustrate the fact that the naturalistic fallacy is a fallacy, or, in other words, that we are all aware of a certain simple quality which, and not anything else, is what we mainly mean by the term good. And 2. To shew that not one but many different things possess this property. For I cannot hope to recommend the doctrine that things which are good do not owe their goodness to their common possession of any other property, without a criticism of the main doctrines opposed to this, whose power to recommend themselves is proved by their wide prevalence. 25. The theories I propose to discuss may be conveniently divided into two groups. The naturalistic fallacy always implies that when we think, this is good, what we are thinking is that the thing in question bears a definite relation to some one other thing. But this one thing, by reference to which good is defined, may be either what I may call a natural object, something of which the existence is admittedly an object of experience, or else it may be an object which is only inferred to exist in a supersensible real world. These two types of ethical theory I propose to treat separately. Theories of the second type may conveniently be called metaphysical, and I shall postpone consideration of them till chapter 4. In this and the following chapter, on the other hand, I shall deal with theories which owe their prevalence to the supposition that good can be defined by reference to a natural object, and these are what I mean by the name which gives the title to this chapter, Naturalistic Ethics. It should be observed that the fallacy by reference to which I defined metaphysical ethics is the same in kind, and I give it but one name, the naturalistic fallacy. But when we regard the ethical theories recommended by this fallacy, it seems convenient to distinguish those which consider goodness to consist in relation to something which exists here and now from those which do not. According to the former, ethics is an empirical and positive science. Its conclusions should be all established by means of empirical observation and induction. But this is not the case with metaphysical ethics. There is, therefore, a marked distinction between these two groups of ethical theories based on the same fallacy, and within naturalistic theories, too, a convenient division may also be made. There is one natural object, namely pleasure, which has perhaps been as frequently held to be the sole good as all the rest put together. And there is, moreover, a further reason for treating hedonism separately. That doctrine has, I think, as plainly as any other owed its prevalence to the naturalistic fallacy, but it has had a singular fate in that the writer, who first clearly exposed the fallacy of the naturalistic arguments by which it had been attempted to prove that pleasure was the sole good, has maintained that nevertheless it is the sole good. I propose therefore to divide my discussion of hedonism from that of other naturalistic theories, treating of naturalistic ethics in general in this chapter, and of hedonism in particular in the next. 26. The subject of the present chapter is, then, ethical theories which declare that no intrinsic value is to be found except in the possession of some one natural property other than pleasure, and which declare this because it is supposed that to be good means to possess the property in question. Such theories I call naturalistic. I have thus appropriated the name naturalism to a particular method of approaching ethics, a method which, strictly understood, is inconsistent with the possibility of any ethics whatsoever. This method consists in substituting for good some one property of a natural object or of a collection of natural objects, and in thus replacing ethics by some one of the natural sciences. In general, the sciences thus substituted is one of the sciences specially concerned with man, owing to the general mistake, for such I hold it to be, of regarding the matter of ethics as confined to human conduct. In general, psychology has been the science substituted, as by J.S. Mill, or sociology, as by Professor Clifford and other modern writers. But any other science might equally well be substituted. It is the same fallacy which is implied when Professor Tyndall recommends us to conform to the laws of matter, and here the science which is proposed to substitute for ethics is simply physics. The name then is perfectly general, for no matter what the something is that good is held to mean, the theory is still naturalism. Whether good be defined as yellow or green or blue, as loud or soft, as round or square, as sweet or bitter, as productive of life or productive of pleasure, as willed or desired or felt, whichever of these or of any other object in the world good may be held to mean, the theory which hold it to mean them will be a naturalistic theory. I have called such theories naturalistic because all of these terms denote properties, simple or complex, or some simple or complex natural object, and before I proceed to consider them, it will be well to define what is meant by nature and by natural objects. By nature, then, I do mean, and have meant, that which is the subject matter of the natural sciences and also of psychology. It may be said to include all that has existed, does exist, or will exist in time. If we consider whether any object is of such a nature that it may be said to exist now, to have existed, or to be about to exist, then we may know that that object is a natural object, and that nothing of which this is not true is a natural object. Thus, for instance, of our minds we should say that they did exist yesterday, and that they do exist today, and probably will exist in a minute or two. We shall say that we had thoughts yesterday, which have ceased to exist now, although their effects may remain, and in so far as those thoughts did exist, they too are natural objects. There is, indeed, no difficulty about the objects themselves in the sense in which I have just used the term. It is easy to say which of them are natural, and which, if any, are not natural. But when we begin to consider the properties of objects, then I fear the problem is more difficult. Which among the properties of natural objects are natural properties, and which are not? For I do not deny that good is a property of certain natural objects. Certain of them, I think, are good, and yet I have said that good itself is not a natural property. Well, my test for these two also concerns their existence in time. Can we imagine good as existing by itself in time, and not merely as a property of some natural object? For myself, I cannot so imagine it, whereas with the greater number of properties of object, those which I call the natural properties, their existence does seem to me to be independent of the existence of those objects. They are, in fact, rather parts of which the object is made up than mere predicates which attach to it. If they were all taken away, no object would be left, not even a bare substance, for they are in themselves substantial, and give to the object all the substance that it has. But this is not so with good. If indeed good were a feeling, as some would have us believe, then it would exist in time. But that is why to call it so is to commit the naturalistic fallacy. It will always remain pertinent to ask whether the feeling itself is good, and if so, then good cannot itself be identical with any feeling. 27. Those theories of ethics, then, are naturalistic, which declare the soul good to consist in some one property of things which exist in time, and which do so because they suppose that good itself can be defined by reference to such a property, and we may now proceed to consider such theories. And first of all, one of the most famous of ethical maxims is that which recommends a life according to nature. That was the principle of the Stoic ethics. But since their ethics has some claim to be called metaphysical, I shall not attempt to deal with it here. But the same phrase reappears in Rousseau, and it is not unfrequently maintained even now that what we ought to do is live naturally. Now let us examine this contention in its general form. It is obvious in the first place that we cannot say that everything natural is good, except perhaps in virtue of some metaphysical theory, such as I shall deal with later. If anything natural is equally good, then certainly ethics, as it is ordinarily understood, disappears. For nothing is more certain from an ethical point of view than that some things are bad and others good. The object of ethics is, indeed, in chief part, to give you general rules whereby you may avoid the one and secure the other. What then does natural mean in this advice to live naturally, since it obviously cannot apply to everything that is natural? The phrase seems to point to a vague notion that there is some such thing as natural good, to a belief that nature may be said to fix and decide what shall be good, just as she fixes and decides what shall exist. For instance, it may be supposed that health is susceptible of a natural definition, that nature has fixed what health shall be, and health, it may be said, is obviously good. Hence in this case nature has decided the matter. We have only to go to her and ask her what health is, and we shall know what is good. We shall have based an ethics upon science. But what is this natural definition of health? I can only conceive that health should be defined in natural terms as the normal state of an organism, for undoubtedly disease is also a natural product. To say that health is what is preserved by evolution, what itself tends to preserve, in the struggle for existence, the organism which possesses it, comes to the same thing. For the point of evolution is that it pretends to give a causal explanation of why some forms of life are normal and others are abnormal. It explains the origin of species. When therefore we are told that health is natural, we may presume that what is meant is that it is normal, and that when we are told to pursue health as a natural end, what is implied is that the normal must be good. But is it so obvious that the natural must be good? Is it really obvious that health, for instance, is good? Was the excellence of Socrates or of Shakespeare normal? Was it rather not abnormal, extraordinary? It is, I think, obvious in the first place that not all that is good is normal. That, on the contrary, the abnormal is often better than the normal. Peculiar excellence, as well as peculiar viciousness, must obviously be not normal, but abnormal. Yet it may be said that nevertheless the normal is good, and I myself am not prepared to dispute that health is good. What I contend is that this must not be taken to be obvious, that it must be regarded as an open question. To declare it to be obvious is to suggest the naturalistic fallacy, just as in some recent books a proof that genius is diseased, abnormal, has been used to suggest that genius ought not to be encouraged. Such reasoning is fallacious, and dangerously fallacious. The fact is that in the very words health and disease we do commonly include the notion that the one is good and the other bad. But when a so-called scientific definition of them is attempted, a definition in natural terms, the only one possible is that by way of normal and abnormal. Now it is easy to prove that some things commonly thought excellent are abnormal, and it follows that they are diseased. But it does not follow, except by virtue of the naturalistic fallacy, that those things commonly thought good are therefore bad. All that has really been shewn is that in some cases there is a conflict between the common judgment that genius is good and the common judgment that health is good. It is not sufficiently recognized that the latter judgment has not a whit more warrant for its truth than the former, that both are perfectly open questions. It may be true, indeed, that by healthy we do commonly imply good, but that only shews that when we so use the word, we do not mean the same thing by it as the thing which is meant in medical science. That health, when the word is used to denote something good, is good, goes no way at all to shew that health, when the word is used to denote something normal, is also good. We might as well say that because bull denotes an Irish joke, and also a certain animal, the joke and the animal must be the same thing. We must not therefore be frightened by the assertion that a thing is natural into the admission that it is good. Good does not, by definition, mean anything that is natural, and it is therefore always an open question whether anything that is natural is good. 28. But there is another slightly different sense in which the word natural is used with an implication that it denotes something good. This is when we speak of natural affections or unnatural crimes and vices. Here the meaning seems to be, not so much that the action or feeling in question is normal or abnormal as that it is necessary. It is in this connection that we are advised to imitate savages and beasts. Curious advice, certainly, but of course there may be something in it. I am not here concerned to inquire under what circumstances some of us might with advantage take a lesson from the cow. I have really no doubt that such exist. What I am concerned with is a certain kind of reason, which I think is sometimes used to support this doctrine, a naturalistic reason. The notion sometimes lying at the bottom of the minds of preachers of this gospel is that we cannot improve on nature. This notion is certainly true in the sense that anything we can do will be a natural product. But that is not what is meant by this phrase. Nature is again used to mean a mere part of nature. only this time the part meant is not so much the normal as an arbitrary minimum of what is necessary for life. And when this minimum is recommended as natural as the way of life to which nature points her finger, then the naturalistic fallacy is used. Against this position I wish only to point out that though the performance of certain acts, not in themselves desirable, may be excused as necessary means to the preservation of life, that is no reason for praising them, or advising us to limit ourselves to those simple actions which are necessary, if it is possible for us to improve our condition even at the expense of doing what is in this sense unnecessary. Nature does indeed set limits to what is possible. She does control the means we have at our disposal for obtaining what is good. And of this fact practical ethics, as we shall see later, must certainly take account. But when she is supposed to have a preference for what is necessary means only what is necessary to obtain a certain end, presupposed as the highest good, and what the highest good is, nature cannot determine. Why should we suppose that what is merely necessary to life is ipso facto better than what is necessary to the study of metaphysics, useless as that study may appear? It may be that life is only worth living because it enables us to study metaphysics, is a necessary means thereto. The fallacy of this argument from nature has been discovered as long as Lucian. I was almost inclined to laugh, says Callicratidas in one of the dialogues imputed to him, just now when Charicles was praising irrational brutes and the savagery of the Scythians. In the heat of this argument he was almost repenting that he was born a Greek. What wonder if lions and bears and pigs do not act as I was proposing? That which reason would fairly lead a man to choose cannot be had by creatures that do not reason, simply because they are so stupid. If Prometheus or some other god had given each of them the intelligence of a man, then they would not have lived in deserts and mountains, nor fed on one another. They would have built temples just as we do. Each would have lived in the center of his family, and they would have formed a nation bound by mutual laws. Is it anything surprising that brutes, who have had the misfortune to be unable to obtain by forethought any of the goods with which reasoning provides us, should have missed love too? Lions do not love, but neither do they philosophize. Bears do not love, but the reason is they do not know the sweets of friendship. It is only men who, by their wisdom and knowledge, after many trials, have chosen what is best. 29. To argue that a thing is good because it is natural, or bad because it is unnatural in these common senses of the term, is therefore certainly fallacious, and yet such arguments are very frequently used, but they do not commonly pretend to give a systematic theory of ethics. Among attempts to systematize and appeal to nature, that which is now most prevalent is to be found in the application to ethical questions of the term evolution, in the ethical doctrines which have been called evolutionistic. These doctrines are those which maintain that the course of evolution, while it chooses the direction in which we are developing, thereby and for that reason chooses the direction in which we ought to develop. Writers who maintain such a doctrine are at present very numerous and very popular, and I propose to take as my example the writer who is perhaps best known of them all, Mr. Herbert Spencer. Mr. Spencer's doctrine, it must be owned, does not offer the clearest example of the naturalistic fallacy as used in support of evolutionistic ethics. A clearer example might be found in Guyot, a writer who has lately had considered vogue in France, but who is not so well known as Spencer. Guyot might almost be called a disciple of Spencer. He is frankly evolutionistic and frankly naturalistic, and I may mention that he does not seem to think that he differs from Spencer by reason of his naturalism. The point in which he has criticized Spencer concerns the question how far the ends of pleasure and of increased life coincide as motives and means to the attainment of the ideal. He does not seem to think that it differs from Spencer in the fundamental principle that the ideal is quantity of life measured in breadth as well as in length, or as Guyot says, expansion and intensity of life, nor in the naturalistic reason which he gives for this principle. And I am not sure that he does differ from Spencer in these points. Spencer does, as I shall shew, use the naturalistic fallacy in details, but with regard to his fundamental principles the following doubts occur. Is he fundamentally a hedonist? And if so, is he a naturalistic hedonist? In that case he would better have been treated in my next chapter. Does he hold that a tendency to increase quantity of life is merely a criterion of good conduct? Or does he hold that such increase of life is marked out by nature as an end at which we ought to aim? I think his language in various places would give colour to all these hypotheses, though some of them are mutually inconsistent. I will try to discuss the main points. 30. The modern vogue of evolution is chiefly owing to Darwin's investigations as to the original species. Darwin formed a strictly biological hypothesis as to the manner in which certain forms of animal life became established, while others died out and disappeared. His theory was that this might be accounted for, partly at least, in the following way. When certain varieties occurred, the cause of their occurrence is still in the main unknown. It might be that some of the points in which they have varied from their parent species or from other species then existing made them better able to persist in the environment in which they found themselves, less liable to be killed off. They might, for instance, be better able to endure the cold or heat or change of the climate, better able to find nourishment from what surrounded them, better able to escape from or resist other species which fed upon them, better fitted to attract or master the other sex. Being thus liable to die, their numbers relatively to other species would increase, and that very increase in their number might tend towards the extinction of those other species. This theory, to which Darwin gave the name natural selection, was also called the theory of survival of the fittest. The natural process which is thus described was called evolution. It was very natural to suppose that evolution meant evolution from what was lower into what was higher. In fact, it was observed that at least one species, commonly called higher, the species man, had so survived, and among men again it was supposed that the higher races, ourselves for example, had shewn a tendency to survive the lower, such as the North American Indians. We can kill them more easily than they can kill us. The doctrine of evolution was then represented as an explanation of how the higher species survives the lower. Spencer, for example, constantly uses more evolved as equivalent to higher, but it is to be noted that this forms no part of Darwin's scientific theory. That theory will explain equally well how by an alteration in the environment, the gradual cooling of the earth, for example, quite a different species from man, a species which we think infinitely lower, might survive us. The survival of the fittest does not mean, as one might suppose, the survival of what is fittest to fulfill a good purpose, best adapted to a good end. At the last, it means merely the survival of the fittest to survive, and the value of the scientific theory, and it is a theory of great value. Just consists in shewing what are the causes which produce certain biological effects. Whether these effects are good or bad, it cannot pretend to judge. End of chapter 2, part 1.